Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us today for another session of The Economy in Plain English. Today, we're joined by Professor Sir Dieter Helm. We are live on LinkedIn, X, and YouTube. So The Economy in Plain English is brought to you by the David Hume Institute and former BBC journalist Clare English. We are on a mission to increase understanding of the economy, what it is, how it works, and all of it in plain English. I'd like to give a shout out to Robbie Mockery and Suzanne Lampert at Heriot-Watt University for sharing last week's episode with their students, and welcome all Heriot-Watt students who are joining us today, or those in the economy things. Maybe not every single student at Heriot-Watt University is here.
Yes.
Do not be shy. Please do ask us your questions. I'm particularly looking at LinkedIn. I think I'm going to try YouTube today as well. But if you've got a question, share it with us and we will try and answer your data. Although we've only got half an hour, so get in quick if you do have one. If there's any questions as we go, I'll weave them in with Claire. But it's a conversation and we want it to be all in plain English. Over to you, Claire.
Thank you very much, Techmeister. I thank God you're doing that. That's all I'm saying. Clear English back again. And we're trying to do the economy in plain English. I am the plain English in question, literally, but I've got a pretty limited appreciation of what the economy and its functions are all about. As I said last week when we started out on this economic voyage, this stuff's important just now because we have an election coming up. So anything that anyone puts in their manifesto, we need to know what the ramifications are to how we live our lives. And crucially, the decisions taken in the past, the recent past, and this year are going to be legacy for future generations. And this is today why I'm so excited. We've got a wonderful guest to talk about the future. Professor Sir Dieter Helm of Oxford University, or University of Oxford, is with us. Author of many fascinating books. That's cue you to stick your book up, Dieter, and show us what it looks like. There you go, legacy. That's the book. We've done the punt there. Get your questions in, as Susan's saying, to the chat box. It would be wonderful to have you adding to the debate. Don't be shy. There is no such thing as a dumb question. You leave that to me. We're going to make the next 30 minutes very, very friendly and relatable. So on the table today, this is the big subject, the future we're leaving to the future we're leaving to next generations. Have the baby boomers, in effect, spoiled it? Have we been asset stripping the earth so that we're leaving absolutely nothing to even think about sustaining? We're going to get going on that now. And I'd like, Dieter, if you could just give a brief introduction of who you are and what you're all about. That would be lovely. And welcome, by the way.
Well, thank you, Claire. My name's Dieter Helm. I'm Professor of Energy Policy at the University of Oxford and a Fellow in Economics at New College. I've been the Chair of the Natural Capital Committee and been deeply involved in designing the Environment Act, for example, in the UK, very involved in energy policy. As Claire said, I've written a few books about some of these things.
You just said natural capital. My ears are flapping. I think I know what you mean, but just to be clear.
So our economy is made up of lots of different kinds of what we call capital. There is, manufactured capital, factories, buildings, power stations, all the sort of physical stuff that's in our economy. There's human capital, which is all the ideas, skills, brains, capacities of us humans that we apply to make stuff in our economy. There's social capital as well, which is all the cultural framework within which we operate. But the really big one, which is much neglected by economists, is the natural environment. All that stuff that nature gives us for free, which enables us humans to thrive. The atmosphere, the biodiversity, the river catchments, all that natural capital that's there for us to use and hopefully not abuse. And indeed, we've done quite a lot of the abusing.
We certainly have. Okay, so we start these sessions usually, Dieter, with a very simple question. What for you in your head is the economy? Because everyone seems to have completely different definitions of it. So for you, in a couple of sentences, what does it mean?
Well, the economy is how we go about producing stuff, which makes our lives possible. Food, energy, a whole host of things that you'll find, on your kitchen table, in the cupboard, etc. And it provides a lot of services. Spotify, all the Googles and the Wikipedias and all that kind of stuff, the mobile communications. All of those things are what an economy delivers to us. And we're the other end of that. We are the people who do the consuming. It's for us. So, for example, if we whinge on about oil companies producing fossil fuels, remember, they're for you and me. We buy the stuff. We're the ultimate drivers of what the outputs are.
Okay, that's great. Another big question, I suppose, but if we can encapsulate it, who do you think the economy is working for at the moment?
Well, most economists think that the world comprises consumers who do consuming and producers who make stuff. Actually, I think that there's a prior to that. It's really about citizens. It's about us as citizens and how we get what we want, but how we do it in a respecting way for our environment and making sure that we're not trashing things so that the next generation has a lot less life chances than we do.
Are there some people in the economy that are benefiting more than others? And that sounds like a dumb question, but we think there's inequality. Are we right?
Well, of course, there are some people who are benefiting more than others. If you try and envisage what a perfectly equal world would look like, there really would be very little incentive to do anything. I mean, a better question is, are there some people who are benefiting too much, more than they're entitled to, relative to the rest of the population? And yeah, of course there are. And that inequality is something which has grown and we ought to be mindful of.
And who are they? Are they the people that already have the most? Is that what we're talking about?
Well, there are two ways in which people make more than the rest of us. One is that they own capital. They own stuff. They own houses. They own businesses. They own factories. And they get the profits and the dividends and the rents from those. And then there's another group who basically earn a lot because they are very good at what they do. Entrepreneurs, business people, ordinary people doing what they do in normal day-to-day life. And so when you try to work out whether someone's entitled to what they get, whether it's fair, you have to sort out, first of all, whether you really identified deserving returns. And you have to look at the other end, which is, every citizen is entitled, in my view, to access to the basic social services, the basic capitals, to nature, to energy, to water, to transport, to communications now. And we should have that as citizens. And then, of course, they need a minimum income. So social justice, as you might describe all this, is pretty complex. And it isn't amenable to simple ideas like, if only we made it all more equal, we'd all be better off. Not necessarily.
Okay, let's talk about what your passion really, which is a sustainable economy. What is a sustainable economy? What does it look like? What does it function like, Dieter?
Well, not like the one we're in at the moment.
Okay, so it's just the opposite, is it?
So a sustainable economy, the sustainable economy, is one that enables the next generation to choose how to live their lives with the capabilities of the assets they need to do that we've properly maintained and properly looked after. So it's not just that we as citizens need access to nature, access to water, transport, energy, and so on and so forth. We need to make sure that we fix the potholes in the road so that the next generation gets at least as good a set of assets. And frankly, we don't. So, what I've been really interested in is trying to describe what it would look like if we really lived within our environmental means and our broader economic means.
So can you paint a picture of what it might look like? Tell us about this. It sounds almost utopian, but how good could it be?
Well, it could be very good. It's a world in which, all the citizens have access to the things that they need. So you could go down to the railway station and the train might actually turn up. It might actually work. The lines may be capable of doing it. You could, in my bit of Oxfordshire, go out on your bicycle and not come off in a pothole. You could be sure that you aren't going to get power cuts, And you could be sure that your broadband works and indeed you've got access to it. And you could be sure that the river is not full of sewage and that it's not polluted by the runoff from agriculture, and so on and so forth. You could have a health service that functions properly and really is free at the point of use to everybody, and a decent education system that gives all kids a decent life chance. I mean, it's not rocket science to describe what this is, and it's not unreasonable to expect that to happen. But we won't get that if we're the next generation. Not me, I'll be long gone, but the next generation, if we carry on trashing what we've got, using up the capital, and not doing the maintenance properly. And I keep coming back to that word maintenance. You have to maintain this stuff. These are what we call assets in perpetuity. You have a stewardship job to hand these on to the next generation. And that's not what we're doing.
Is the problem then not political, but societal? It's all about how we think about our responsibilities to the next generation and maintaining things and sustaining them in this life as we live it just now. Who's to blame, basically?
Well, it is ultimately about us, but it's not just what you and I do individually, though that matters a lot. It's about the institutions and the rules by which we operate. And that is the politics of this frame. So if you think what you and I do, a sort of little device I have in mind is that you go away and you write down your carbon diary, and indeed your environmental diary for today. What did you do today? You got up, you went to the loo probably, you cooked some breakfast, you put your clothes on, you got on a bus, you got in a car. God forbid you might have flown somewhere off on holiday. I don't fly, but you might have done that. And so on and so forth. If you really drill down into what you're doing in your daily life, you'll discover why it's the case that we're still nearly 80% dependent on fossil fuels. We're not making much progress on climate change at all. Your clothes, your shoes, the plastics, the wrapping around your food, the energy that's used to, flush the loo, all of this stuff is laden with carbon. So that's down to us. But one of the reasons we make the choices we do, and they're very damaging, some of our choices, is because we don't face the true cost of what we're doing. You don't pay for the cost of carbon pollution you're causing. And you may delude yourself with the idea, oh, it's some nasty capitalist oil company that's causing all this pollution. No, they don't produce the stuff for fun. It's for you. You're doing the consuming. And so that's where all of the sustainable economy starts with you and me, and then goes to the kind of society, the culture, and the rules that we create around our choices.
It's also political, though, isn't it? And policy, it's just policy driven as well. Look at all those COPs we've had. And as you say, nothing much seems to have changed. What do we do to break the stasis there then to make things actually happen? And I totally take on board, we all have personal responsibility at that micro level. But what should governments and people that are thinking about coming into power in government be concentrating on?
Well, you mentioned the COPs, and we've just had COPs 28, okay? 28 COPs. And every single year since 1990, we've added 2 parts of million of carbon to the atmosphere. And that's what matters, is how much carbon's up there, right? And you would have expected since 1990, after 28 goes, that it might be at least stabilizing or coming down. Not a bit of it. It's just a straight line going up. And that's where we've got to. So anyone who thinks another 28 COPs are going to solve climate change, well, you and I are probably on a different planet. Okay. And 90,000 people flew there. I wonder what the carbon footprint was of all those people who trotted off halfway around the globe to go and have a debate about whether the world's countries can agree that it might be a good idea to get out of fossil fuels sometime soon. I mean, that's it. I'm being exaggerating. I'm overstating it. There's quite a few interesting things that were achieved, but we're not getting there. And you have to ask yourself why. And the answer to that question is that no set of independent nations are going to sacrifice their sovereignty in order to sign up to a global enforceable contract. Do you think we're going to send gunboats around to China if they break the rules that are put in place? The reality is you have to start bottom up. You have to start with carbon consumption, us, and you have to make sure that we pay for that carbon consumption properly. Now, some good things coming up. A rather esoteric thing called a carbon border adjustment is going to start pricing in pollution from elsewhere. But this is where we've got to start. And I'll give you a recent example, one from Scotland and one from, actually two, one from the south. Grangemouth in Scotland, one of the largest refineries, is basically closing. And what are we going to do? We're going to import the petrochemicals instead. We'll say, haven't we done well? We've lowered our emissions in Britain. No, we haven't. We haven't changed our consumption at all. And we're going to close the blast furnaces at Port Talbot in South Wales. Great. We close them. So where's the steel going to come from? China, of course. And so you have to come back to, you really got to cut into this deep feature that we're soaked in carbon, that nearly 80% of what we do is dependent on fossil fuels. And the scale of what we would really have to do if we really cared about this to transform our economies is, you're on a par from being in, say, 1936 and thinking, oh, we're a peacetime economy. We want to win the Battle of Britain in 1941. You have to have a national effort to do this. And I like to prick these balloons, because it's just not true that what we're doing is on a sustainable path. And we have to decide, are we humans prepared to face up to the consequence of us living beyond our environmental means, or are we not? We say we are, but look how little people are prepared to pay to do something about it. The reality has not really dawned yet.
Does it all come back to political leadership, to somebody saying this stuff's really important and we're putting it high up, if not top of the agenda? That's the point.
Well,
we're waiting to be led. This is the problem with humanity.
You might think that, but remember, the politicians are the people we elect, not in China or in Russia or in much of the world, by the way. They're self-selecting elites. But even self-selecting elites work out what it is they think the people want. Right? And what we know in Britain, and we've experienced it in the last couple of years, is that the broader voters don't want to be confronted with the costs of climate change, whether they be farmers with their tractors in Paris or Berlin, or whether they be voters who are concerned about their gas boiler and their petrol and diesel car. The truth is, we think we have an affordability crisis. We can't afford what we're currently consuming. And so, to hell with the interests of the future generations, we're not prepared to sacrifice and pay for things like carbon taxes, etc., to internalize what an economist would call an externality, bring it internally and bring it into the cost that you and I face when we go into the supermarket and buy something off the shelf, or worse still, for most people, when they go to the airport and get on that plane and don't pay the cost to the environment of what they're doing.
I think it's really interesting you use the word citizens instead of consumers. Do you think that's going to change a mindset thing as well and make a light bulb go on with us human beings that are populating the planet, that maybe we've got skin in the game here? We seem to dissociate from that at the moment.
Well, just treating people as consumers, or economists think of them as utility maximizers, right? Just preferences, right? Is a debasement of what humans are. And, we don't say, how much money have you got? Can you afford to vote? And hopefully we're never going to say, oh, nice to see you at the hospital. Can you afford to pay? Citizens are entitled to things. We're in this together as citizens. And in order to confront people with the environmental position that we find ourselves in, two things are important. One is to explain that despite all the hype, we're not making much progress, and particularly on climate change. To just get people to get away from the idea that if we build a few more wind turbines, good idea though they are, or put up some solar panels, that somehow this is going to crack the problem. These are intermittent, low generation, low density, geographically dispersed forms of energy. We need bulk energy for our society. That's one thing. But the really important thing is to get people to look the next generation of citizens in the eye. Metaphorically, of course, but actually you can see it. You can see, in my case, my grandchildren. What kind of world am I leaving for them? What is my responsibility as a citizen of society to future citizens? And we don't have that debate. and we ought to have that debate, and we ought to think about what we have to do to just be decent to them, to say I mean, I inherited a lot from the previous generation. I even got free university education, by the way, a whole host of things that the previous generation put in place, which made my life much better than my parents'. Now, we have to think, are we doing that for the next generation? And it's not surprising that many young people feel that their future is not actually as bright as when I was coming out of university. I thought it was wonderful, and it was wonderful. It was opened up in front of me. So there's an ethical debate here. There's a moral debate. There's definitely a political debate. But in all of this, we have to make sure that we understand that it's not just someone else's fault, like nasty companies or whatever, or politicians who don't show leadership. We've got what we create, and it's for us, and we're doing the consuming, and we're doing the voting, and what we're actually engaged in is very unsustainable. I've never met anyone who thinks that we're in a sustainable economy now, and that's why I set about describing what it would be like to do so.
I'm going to invite anyone, I don't know, there might be next generation Gen Z sitting out there watching this, listening to this. Please, this is about your future and our present at the moment. So please do join the chat, get in there. We've only got Dita for the next 10 minutes or so. You might as well jump in. Meanwhile, Susan, what are your observations? You're sitting there and you're nodding and you're looking concerned.
Well, I find, I kind of think what is really going to change the system. So I was lucky enough when Dita was up in Edinburgh a few years ago giving the Macaulay lecture. The Macaulay lecture this year was Johan Rockström, and I will share it afterwards on the various channels so people can watch the recording. It's fascinating because he's talking about the feedback loops being much faster in terms of where we're going with climate change than had been predicted, or at the extremes of what was possible. We are going to be heading for faster climate change. And I just wonder if the externalities, so the things that people see in their own lives, is that going to make them think that we need change faster? So if we get more, yesterday we had the hottest day, I can't remember for how long, but in the Highlands, it was almost 20 degrees in January. Like, what is going on? And that's kind of, there's been a lobby for a long time saying it's not climate change, it's just weather. That push to kind of say climate change is not happening seems to be changing. There does seem to be still lots of politics that's heading for the short term, quick things that people can say rather than thinking long term and not thinking generationally, as Dita said. But we've had brilliant people like Christiana Figueres saying, what are you going to tell your grandchildren? Where is the ethical and moral debate there? And is it just people don't want to think ahead? They just want to carry on doing what they're doing and not make any changes in their own lives. They just think, someone else over there will change something and it'll be okay. There'll be some technological fix. We don't really have to change. And I just wonder, but where does it come back to the economy in terms of, it feels like there's still a lot of economists that aren't thinking about the whole system, are still thinking about costs, but not maybe the full cost of something. Or am I picking that up wrong, Dita?
No, and in my legacy book, I'm out on a limb. Okay, so I'm not a mainstream economist. So I don't think we should focus exclusively on consumers. I think it's citizens we should do. I do think the future is radically uncertain. And therefore, it's about making sure the core assets are looked after. That's not what typical economists do. I think the economy, and particularly the natural world, comes in systems, not in discrete bits. Economists do things like cost-benefit analysis. They look at individual projects separated from the economy. I'm interested in the whole systems that are in place. And I focus on assets, whereas most economists focus on utilities and flows and so on. So I'm not in the mainstream. But I do think that when we're trying to get people to change the way they act, it's very important to be honest about what's happening around them. So if you take climate change, let me say something which will upset a lot of people. For most people in the UK, a climate that's 1 degree or 1.3 degrees warmer is actually better than a climate that wasn't. Okay, so if you look at the numbers, a lot less people are dying in winter from cold. We have a lot less disruption to our economy from cold. It's true, we get some floods. It's true, we get some rainfall. It's the same rainfall roughly as before. It's just coming a bit more intensely, okay? It's true that the sea level may rise a bit, but seawalls aren't that expensive, etc. Indeed, you know, if you look back, it's not surprising the Romans got their army all the way to York and grew grapes. And it's not surprising the Vikings got to Iceland and Greenland and North America. It was warmer. Okay. So it's not us here in the UK that are going to suffer greatly from climate change until it marches above 2 degrees. Then we'll get it. The real problems are in the tropics, and they're in the densely populated developing countries where the impacts are awful. Now, we divorce ourselves from that, but we don't remember that we buy the stuff from them. You know, where do you think the palm oil comes to make all that lunacy in so-called renewable fuels, right? Where do you think all the minerals are coming from to go into your electric car? Go and have a look at Google Earth and have a look at the rainforest being stripped away for nickel in Indonesia. Have a look at the Congo cobalt mines and see the children actually in it. I'm told you can see that from the satellite data. So but this is a mind-bogglingly difficult problem because it's not actually on your doorstep every day. And you know, when it's really sunny in the summer, is it really a disaster here? It is elsewhere, but not here. So my worry about climate change is it actually, in a country like Britain, marginally gets a bit better before it gets a hell of a lot worse. And we don't have a crisis like you do when the lights go out on an energy system and makes you do something about it, or the ambulances don't work at the hospital. And it's getting people to step outside the immediate position and move to more general. And that's where it comes down to putting in place proper pricing, making polluters pay, that's you and me, making the costs in the supermarket address us head on with the implications, not just for you and me per se, but for this planet that we're all going to have to live together on, because once you've extinguished a large number of species and heated the whole thing up, there isn't really any reverse gear.
Got a question here. Why isn't the whole system approach mainstream? I don't even understand that question. So you're going to have to break it down for me, Dieter. Why isn't the whole system approach mainstream?
It's a damn good question, and it ought to be, right? So I work on catchment systems. I work on energy systems. I think about things like offshore grids versus onshore grids. I think about, you know, whether there's pollution in London. I think about what happens at the top of the Thames catchment. You know, that's the way we should construct things. Roads, transport, communications, energy, the natural environment, river catchments. These are all systems. And for me, they're the primary building blocks in an economy. Economists just treat any asset like any other and just tradable with each other. I see the economy as, what are those basic infrastructures like first, and are those systems in proper shape? And in my book, I argue as hard as I can that we should switch our economics to thinking more in systems and less in discrete bits and pieces.
I've got another grenade to lob, and I could be asking a dumb question here, but you know, we always hear that term growth, don't we? And I don't want to go too deeply into growth because we're going to do that in a next session or the one after, whatever. But to you, can we have a sustainable economy with growth? Is it desirable?
Yes. Yes, if it's the right sort of growth. So when we report GDP, we're not really capturing economic growth in the sense of an expanding range of opportunities. I give example. You know, if I knock down existing power stations and I put up some low carbon ones instead, you know, I've replaced one asset with another. They're still producing the same output, which is electricity. And actually, nothing's grown, yet it'll be recorded as economic activity, just demolishing the house, that's up GDP, and building a new asset, that's up GDP. It's not taking any account of what you're doing to the balance sheet. And so when people say, I think it's the Labour Party now, I'm very unpolitical about these things, but saying you're going to be the highest growth rate in GDP in the G7 by 2030. I mean, presumably they're going to control the growth rate in the other 6, but I'll put that aside for a moment. Okay, really? Is that what you want to do? What is genuine economic growth is advances in ideas and technology. So when I was doing my thesis, I had an Olympus portable typewriter with Tipp-Ex and carbon paper. Okay, now I'm talking to you on a video link. I've got a mobile phone here with a computer in it that's better than Oxford University's was in the early 1980s. That is growth. My possibilities are much greater. I can do a lot more. I can make my book open access, so anyone can download my book for free. Okay, that would not have been possible when I was doing my graduate work. That's progress. That is genuine economic growth. But don't for a moment think that when someone says GDP is going up, that that's necessarily a good or indeed bad thing. It isn't what growth is about. And no growth, no human progress just cuts against both what's practical and possible and sustainable, and cuts against everything and anything in human nature. We always want to do better. We always want to improve things. And I'll go on trying to do that myself for as long as I can possibly stand it.
Oh, I'm so glad I asked you that. Susan, have we got some final thoughts here? And then I'm going to ask a final question to Dita. Oh, you're on mute, Susan. Hang on.
I'd been typing back to someone that asked a question and I wasn't sure if we'd already answered it. So I didn't want you hearing my my tinkling on my keyboard. I was just going to ask Dita, so on the growth point, we hear lots of politicians from different parties talking about growth all the time. But how will any of the voters know if any of them have achieved anything they've said if we can't really know on, how would we measure it? Is it just those individuals' lives feeling better? And that's kind of a proxy for growth, or have politicians got some magic way we don't know about yet?
Well, the way in which it's felt is that people will, in principle, have more income to spend. So they'll have more in the pocket when they go into or on the credit card or whatever it is when they go in the supermarket. And government will have more money to spend because we'll pay more taxes. Okay. But you have to really think how much of that is genuine and how much isn't. Okay. In my world, if we properly maintain the sewers and we properly maintain the roads and we properly maintain our natural environment, they would feel it by having access to nature, by having access to rivers that don't have sewage going down them, and by having a reliable, reasonably priced broadband connection, etc. So the things that citizens need to participate in the society, to participate in the economy, would get better if it was sustainable growth. They would have the illusion they're getting better if it was GDP growth, and only that bit of GDP growth which was consistent with actually achieving the sustainable economy.
I think we're out of time, but I've got one final thing to say to you. And we ask everyone this at the end of these sessions of the Economy in Plain English, Dita. It is, what do you want everyone listening or watching this? And I believe people are probably listening more today. This is why maybe haven't been as many questions, or I haven't seen as many questions anyway. But I think a lot of people are just digesting what you're saying. But what do you want them to absolutely take away from what you're saying? What is the one big thing they must leave here within their brains?
The way we are running our economy is not sustainable. And I hope most people, if not everyone listening to that, will agree. What I want them to take away is it's perfectly possible to have the sustainable economy, but it requires some really quite substantial change in the way we think about economics, about the way we think about the economy and its systems and its primary assets. And it requires a change in what you do and how you behave. And it requires you and me, of course, to take responsibility so that we hand on to the next generation the economic opportunities, the possibilities for them to choose how to live their lives. And we're not fulfilling our stewardship duty in doing that at the moment. And that is my punchline. Since it isn't sustainable, it will not be sustained. So you can't just go on like this and hope for the best. That's not the case. It will not be sustained. It's going to end, and it either ends by us moving to the sustainable economy, or it ends up with, 3 degrees, 4 degrees climate change, perhaps, certainly more than 2, and much more destruction of our natural world and its biodiversity. We shouldn't do that.
We really need to think about all that. Huge food for thought there. Dita, thank you so much. It's been absolutely fascinating. I hope that you've enjoyed listening to us all, and I haven't asked too many dumb questions. And we would say to you, share this with anyone you think is interested in the economy, and even more so, those who you don't think are interested in the economy, because it opens up the debate to that. A lot of big ideas. Dita's got a book out. Stick the book up again, please, Dita, so that we know. Might as well punt it. And the great news for you is you can have a pint tonight. Is that right?
No, it's not the 1st of February yet.
Oh, no.
But what you can do is download this for free, or of course you can buy a copy of the book. But hopefully, as many people as possible engage with the ideas. I don't necessarily expect you to agree with me, but I'd like to make you think at least. So thank you.
You've certainly done that. Thank you.
I just want to add, you are so right about people just listening and absorbing what's being said. Kevin Havelock, who is at NatWest RBS, has just emailed me to say thanks so much. The conversation was really interesting and excellent. So that it's lovely to get those messages. Do keep in contact, people, of what these kind of conversations mean to you, because we're just not talking enough about the economy in the depth that I think we need to do. And that's what Claire and I are taking you on a journey with these amazing speakers like Dita to really kind of unpick, but in short, sharp bursts at a nice lunchtime slot. So hopefully you can tune in. If anyone is around tonight in Edinburgh, we do have an event that will be, in Dita's terms, helping economic growth, because we love complex policy at the David Hume Institute. And so ideas and technology are coming together. We have Stephen Drost in a fireside conversation with Matt Farrugia about Stephen's recent trip to the Global Incubator Summit in China. And it's all about incubating growth, but hopefully the right kind of growth, Dita. So everyone's very welcome, and please do share this. We will be back next week with Aaron Ardvani talking about diversity in economics, and also beginning to open conversation on the tax system, which will be a challenge in half an hour.
Absolutely, for me it will. Anyway, thank you very much. Enjoyed that. Dita, thank you. Susan, thank you. Take care, everyone.
Thank you very much, everyone.